Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest in our Innovation at Work webinar series from MIT Sloan Executive Education. We're delighted to have people joining us again from all over the world, including today's presenter, Kristine Dery, who is joining us from literally the other side of the planet. It's amazing that technology is enabling us to do that. This should be no surprise in the sense that Kristine's research is all about the way that technology and the way that we work intersect, and the issues that we've all been facing over the last few weeks and months really come to the fore. And I think Kristine and her research and her insights into the question of how can we, and how will we work more effectively, or as effectively as possible, using technology and not being a victim of technology, is something that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I would like to hand over to Kristine, and just another reminder, we will have a short Q&A section at the end, so please do feel free to ask questions as Kristine is speaking. Kristine, over to you.
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time today to come and learn a little about our research. I'm going to be presenting some research we've been doing over the last 5 or so years at MIT Center for Information Systems Research. This research has been ongoing as we've tried to understand the employee experience in a digital world. My colleagues Ina Sebastian and Nick Vandermeulen have been working together with me as we've been trying to understand what this thing called employee experience is all about. And never before has this been as important as it is right now, as we're all going through this very unusual time. And all of these organizations that you see before you are part of our group. I thank them for being part of our research center. This research that I'm going to show you today has been very generously put together by the work and the insights of these organizations, and together with a number of other companies who have also been participated both in the surveys and in the qualitative interviews that we do in order to try and get some more nuanced insights into what's going on in what is a very complex issue. So thank you again to these companies. I guess I'd like to start by saying that we're going through these 3 phases, it seems. The first has been our need to become more connected and operational. And in this phase, you'll see there's a very straight arrow that I've got here. We're introducing standards. It's mainly about the technology. It's about getting VPNs in place, getting the licenses in place that we need, hardware in many cases, but getting our workforce into this more virtual environment. And for most companies, this has been a huge upheaval in that working virtually is part of what they do and part of providing a flexible workplace, but it's certainly not the main way of operating. Most large traditional companies that we study are still primarily a face-to-face environment. So this has been a big uplift for most companies. I would have to say that most of the organizations I've been talking to over the last few weeks are very surprised and amazed at how well they've been able to do this. But now we're moving to the next phase, which is how do we create this more sustainable employee experience? How do we understand everything that our employees are going through in order to be able to deliver these capabilities to customers in this more remote world? And we're starting to see all kinds of needs emerging from all over our organization and in various different times and places. And this seems a little haphazard. There's lots of fires that we're trying to put out. There's lots of things that we're trying to solve, but it's a learning curve. And as we move to the next phase, which is really much more about learning and working together, we start to see that leaders and employees are working in these much more cooperative ways in order to understand how they're going to gather data, gather information, and start to imagine what's going to be important as we move forward to the next post-COVID phase. So I want to just focus on this idea of employee experience today and what it is that we're seeing and learning, and then how in fact we're going to be making some decisions about the way of working as we move forward. this is what we mean when we talk about employee experience. And I think this is the key question that companies are asking themselves at the moment is, how do we make it easier for our people to do their jobs? And given that we've just done a massive shift in the place in which work is being done, how does that change things for us? And how do we start to curate this virtual world and then think about what are the pieces we want to carry forward into the new way of working to enable us to step into a new place in the river, because we're not going to be moving back to the way of work that we had before. We've learned so many things, we've changed so many things about the way people work, that there is a huge opportunity here. We define this as employee experience. It's made up of two key components. It's made about this adaptive work environment, how the work environment adapts to how we work, but then also all these behavioral things that we call rituals or norms, which are the things that enable us to have different kinds of conversations. We've measured companies based on our measures of employee experience, and what we find is that those companies in the top 25% perform very differently. This focus on employee experience really pays off. They have twice the amount of customer satisfaction based on industry adjusted NPS. They're much more innovative, measured on percentage of revenue from new products and services. But not only do those new revenue streams enable them to create new options for customers to engage, but they're also pulling costs out. And this is going to be incredibly important as we move through to the next phase, or as we are trying to adapt to the new economy, as we're constantly pulling costs out in order to create new opportunities for our organizations. So this investing in employee experience really matters in terms of both generating new revenues and also pulling out costs. Here's the thing that I think is most important here. If we are going to suggest that this is just about whether people are going to work from the office, these more contemporary open offices, or from home, we're wasting a huge opportunity. Our research has shown us that just designing new spaces, whether those spaces be virtual or physical, is just not the answer. And that in fact, unless that's part of an integrated strategy around employee experience, then we don't see that uplift in performance that we just talked about. So just having a conversation around the lever of space is really a wasted crisis in this time. I want you to think about this as being a lens. We've used a runway analogy here, and we have 6 levers on the dashboard at the front that enable us to deliver this employee experience and then reach these ultimate goals of change and performance. And what we've done is we've turned the lever of space, which you'll see that little lever in the middle there, we've turned that from one side to the other, from a completely, largely co-located environment now to this more virtual environment. And I want us to focus now on 3 of these other levers that then become much more important for us to start to focus on. And I'm going to share with you some of the insights that we've had from organizations into how they've been going as they've pulled those 2 big levers. The first one I want to talk about is the lever of systems. And this is when we start to move from this idea of employee connectivity to employee experience. And there's a number of themes that are coming out as companies are looking at the systems that they have got in order to deliver on this employee experience. I think one of the most powerful ones is we're starting to empower people to use a lot of these digital capabilities. And these capabilities have been sitting in these systems for a long time, but we haven't really enabled them to be enacted. So I'm thinking particularly here about companies who have moved into more agile environments, where there's been a real sense of belief over the last couple of years that those agile teams are much better managed and much more productive when they come into a more co-located environment. In fact, a number of companies have now got business rules in place that require digital teams to be more co-located. In fact, what we're finding is these teams have moved relatively seamlessly into these virtual environments as they have engaged with a whole lot of latent capabilities that have been sitting in software that they've had available to them all along. So we're seeing a lot of the unlocking of new capabilities of technology, but we're also seeing these long-standing blockers that have been in the way of creating new technologies and new ways of being able to work. And we've seen those move away very quickly, and companies that have typically taken many weeks to deliver new capabilities to employees, able to do that in just a few days. So differences in decision-making within the organization, differences in the way that employee-facing technologies are being funded and are being resourced, and a much greater focus from senior management into iterating around these problems and these challenges and delivering systems much faster. So we're starting to we're digitizing work in order to work digitally. And companies are realizing that this, in fact, isn't taking them nearly as long as what they first thought. So that's the first lever of systems that we're pulling in order to deliver this more virtual workforce and new ways of working in this environment. The second big lever that I was talking about is what we call sustaining leadership. Paul Cobbin at DBS refers to this as the shift from the hardware to the hardware. And never before, I think, has this been more acutely felt than as we've moved into the phase of shifting from just being connected, where it's been largely about systems, to now being much more about how do we develop this employee experience that enables our people to work really effectively. So leaders are starting to behave very differently as they've realized that this is a lot more about working with people, understanding their needs. We've got a lot of people playing out of position at the moment, moving into new roles, no longer traveling to the geography where they would typically deliver their services or their capabilities within the organization, but having to do that virtually and learning how to do that very effectively. We're moving people into IT help desks, into call centers, into different roles within the organization as we've had to shift the business model and deliver new capabilities both to customers and to employees. And we've had to figure out how to deliver the support and training and then the community so they can share knowledge and feel more comfortable in those roles. So I think, so going forward, I think there are a lot of lessons that we're starting to understand and learn about being able to move people around more effectively. There's a much greater sense of empathy, and you'll see from this quote that a lot of organizations expressed very similar things to me in the latest research. We're starting to care more about people. I call this the shift from checking up to checking in, where we're starting to really use the technology in order to check up on what people are doing and understand productivity a lot more effectively. And now, but instead, leaders are having to enact these capabilities of checking in, of working out what it is that's making it hard for people to work effectively, to do their jobs, and then to respond to those speed bumps in a really fast and timely way to enable people to be more effective. So for some people, this has meant, as they're trying to homeschool their children and work from home, that we've shifted time in which work is being done. For others, it's meant new technologies. For others, it's meant more training or more capabilities being delivered in terms of support and knowledge sharing. But a real difference in this big lever of sustaining leadership that requires leaders to be a lot more about checking in than just checking up. But the third lever, I think, that we're really seeing that's being that's making a very big difference, and that's often underrated when we start to think about work, is this lever of learning. As we go through and as we understand and check in with our people more, what we're seeing and understanding is these speed bumps, these things that make it really hard for our people to work. And the more data we're collecting, the more we're working with our employees to understand where those speed bumps are, the better we're getting at being able to shift those bumps. And what we're learning in this new world of COVID-19 is the faster you're able to smooth those bumps on the road, the more effective people are able to be. We've known for some time that these workplace speed bumps destroy the very value that we're often trying to create as we enact new capabilities for customers. So working with employees to get rid of these speed bumps becomes an important part of the learning exercise. Which brings me to the third lever that we really need to be keeping a very close eye on. While we're pulling those big levers of systems and leadership, keep your eye on this lever of systemic learning. Companies are really trying to make these speed bumps more visible. I think leaders checking in rather than checking up is really helping with that process, but also the increased data that they're gathering off the technologies are also raising a lot of these speed bumps. We're seeing a shift in the way employees are really being empowered to unlock a lot of these new digital capabilities themselves. A big law firm that I spoke to last week has been really amazed at the increased capabilities of their partners as they've had to work more remotely and rely less on the people around them and actually be much more effective and empowered to unlock the capabilities of the technology themselves. So every organization that's in my study at the moment has seen a huge uplift in the requirements around their IT help desk in the early days, but as their employees are becoming more confident and more empowered, are sharing more knowledge around how to use the digital capabilities themselves. In fact, that is now being normalized, but the nature of the technologies is really shifting. And now we're having to focus on curating the virtual workspace. We've been very good at thinking about what physical workspace looks like and how that's part of the overall experience that we're trying to create for employees. But curating this virtual workspace is very new and very different for most organizations. And companies, leaders working very closely together with employees are able to really rethink how these technologies are being used and how the workplace in a virtual sense is able to deliver vastly new capabilities. And through that, we're seeing as evolving of very new rituals or habits, which is an important part of the overall employee experience. The question that companies like ANZ are asking is, how do we learn from all of this? How do we gather the stories, the data, the insights to work out what it is we want to do moving forward? What do we want to take with us? What we know is that just taking the idea of space with us is really a lost opportunity. So we're really thinking here about how we are to digitize work in order to humanize it. And I think that's been one of the big learnings that companies have seen as they've gone through this experience of COVID-19. So that brings me to the back to this dashboard that I spoke about at the very beginning. So think about it as an aircraft heading along this very new runway. We have this series of levers right in front of us that we can pull. There are 6 of them, as you can see there. All of them are important. All of them we're going to be using in various different ways to build this employee experience around creating this adaptive work environment, really building very new rituals and new habits going forward, and that there's a real business value to be had as we keep iterating around that and learning to build a new employee experience. So with that, I'll hand back to Peter to see if we've got some questions and a bit of discussion at the end.
Thank you, Kristine. Yes, we've been getting a few questions, and maybe I could start with that last point that you were making. I like the phrase adaptive work. And of course, we've all been adapting very quickly during the early stages, at least, of this particular crisis. I like to joke, only half a joke in education. We've done in 2 weeks what it was going to take 20 years probably to do in terms of changing how we literally create an experience for our customers and for our employees. So many organizations have been making these very rapid changes. you've been studying these phenomena for years. What's different? I mean, it's an obvious answer, I suppose, but what's been different that it's enabled these very rapid changes now? But more importantly, how can we sustain that kind of much more adaptive approach?
I think that this is one of the biggest learnings coming out of this exercise, Peter, this crisis that we've been going through. It would be easy, the easy fallback position is to say, well, we're in crisis mode and we're all, pulling all hands to the wheel, and we're able to make changes to systems and to the way in which we do things and the way in which we lead our organization as a result of just getting everybody together in this and focused on this very intense change. But I think what companies are really starting to work out is what we've been talking about in digital for a very long time, is that this does take a new approach to thinking about how we get new digital capabilities together, how we work more effectively in these more iterative teams, agile teams, or customer-focused teams. I think we're seeing how the old ways, the old operational backbones are so slow and cumbersome, and that we need to look to new ways of thinking about the cloud, about data, about capabilities that we're able to quickly get into the hands of our people. And I think there's also been a shift in the tolerance for minimum viable products as people are starting to work with them and realizing that they're part of the design process. They're not sitting there waiting for something perfect to land in their laps. So this speed of delivery has been a big, a steep learning curve, but one that most organizations will carry with them going forward.
That's really interesting. What another kind of question I've been seeing coming in from our viewers here is, could you say a bit more about the causality, if you like, between the improvements that the firms that you studied have seen from what you describe as the employee experience versus the kind of operational efficiencies that you'd expect to get from IT anyway?
I think what we've seen is that focusing on employee experience enables your employees to be empowered to be part of this process of creating greater efficiencies, but also creating new opportunities to engage with new revenue streams. So the more traditional ways would be to pull out costs, build efficiencies. Digitization is a huge part of this, digitizing work, delivering work in a digital way, but also building the capabilities around employees so that they're not just recipients of this technology, but rather they really understand how to lift the lid of it and work with it more effectively so that they become part of the solution as we move forward to building a new business model that's enabled by digital. Digital capabilities offer enormous opportunity. And I think one of the things that companies have seen as they've gone through this crisis is that if you empower people by giving them the support and the training and the shared knowledge, then they will start to engage with those technologies much more effectively and use all their capabilities. That's
great. And looking back at the research, going back over years, but also importantly what you're seeing now, what about, what the definition of employee is in employee experience? Is this the time has come for gig workers and their employees too, in this sense? So how do you see that?
So we've done a lot of research on this, and we've looked at mix between FTE employees and gig workers or freelancers, the contingent workforce. One of the things that we've seen is that when we've looked at companies that have a difference between their percentage of employees that are FTEs versus contingent, companies with a higher percentage of FTEs in the digital workforce way outperform those that have a massive reliance on the contingent workforce. But this is a new world going forward. And I think one of the things that we've started to understand is how to effectively build an environment for a workforce that is not co-located. Now that starts to open up new opportunities to engage with both the FTEs and the freelancers or gig workers, but your ability to make choices around who will be FTE and who you're going to take from the freelancer and gig workforce will be very much dependent on how effective you are at building this employee experience, both an adaptive work environment, adaptive being very key to this, and these very new work habits that enable those two workforces to integrate and work effectively together.
That makes sense. So there's a lot here about, this is the marriage of human capabilities and technological capabilities, and clearly there's a big question about upskilling and reskilling around our human capabilities. So maybe in closing, thinking about, many of the people viewing this webinar are themselves leaders. So, what are the kind of upskilling and capabilities that we need to focus on for ourselves as leaders, and also, for our people, for our organizations? Is there, a real focus now, and maybe as you think about post-COVID, how that will play out?
Yeah, never before have we seen so much focus on self-help as we've seen in the last few months. So both individuals in the organization reaching out and using all of the resources online to upskill, to learn new ways of just doing simple things like, how do I use Zoom more effectively, to companies launching very quickly and with very low budgets, but pulling from all different places and building a self-help platform that enables their employees to be more effective in what they do. So building these new digital capabilities, enabling the organization to learn from itself, using social networks, using video sharing, all kinds of ways of really enabling people to build new capabilities in your organization is going to be one of the keys to enabling an employee experience that's fit for the digital world going forward. Peter, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. That's a good example of the technology learning that we all have to do. So this is a good point, though, to note our half hour is almost up. Thank you very much, Kristine Dery, for this fascinating journey through your research over the past several years and how important and current it is right now. Thank you for the very many questions that we had from you all around the world. If you'd like to read more of Kristine's work, you saw a slide shoot by there. We'll be circulating this information by email shortly, or you can check it out on our website, executive.mit.edu. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Kristine. And we hope that we'll see many of you next week in the next in our series of Innovation at Work webinar series, where we're all trying to help ourselves learn and upskill and reskill in all the ways that we need to more than ever. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Peter. Goodbye, everyone. Go safely.